it's time to look at another minor prophet again. This time, Joel. The book of Joel, right after Hosea, 3 chapters, a very small, simple outline. It's basically a call to prayer, chapter 1, and halfway through chapter 2, 2:17, and then answer the prayer, 2:18 through the rest of the book, 3:21. Talks a lot about locusts. Locusts are interesting. Chapter 1, the thought is real locusts, and the different types of locusts are described and just their destructiveness. And then chapter 2, spiritualizing it, a spiritual locust, and how that attacks us as well. Locusts, I had to look this up, so I'm going to read this. One swarm of locusts can contain up to 10 billion individual locusts. As many as 1,000 newly hatched hopping locusts can occupy 1 square foot. A single locust can travel 3,000 miles during its lifetime, stripping vegetation wherever it and its swarm lands. There's a swarm can devour in one day what 40,000 people eat in 1 year. And in 1958, in Ethiopia, they lost 167 metric tons of grain, enough to feed more than 1 million people for a year. And most of these facts are taken from World Vision. That's the destructiveness of locusts. And in that day, if the locust destroyed all your crops, you starved. And so this was a real problem. But Joel talks about the day of the Lord quite often, 5 times in these 3 chapters. And for a small book, it's very, very important. In that, Joel is quoted in Acts 2, 17 to 21, where Peter is giving his famous sermon at the day of Pentecost. He is quoting Joel 2, 28 to 32. Romans 10, 9 is quoting Joel 2, 32, that all those who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. What we're going to be looking at today is Joel 2, 12 to 14. This says, "Yet even now, declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, with weeping and mourning. Rend your hearts and not your garments. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, and he relents over disaster. Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, a grain offering, a drink offering for the Lord your God." And so, what is he saying yet even now? Joel, in the beginning of chapter 2, talks about the day of the Lord. And at the end of his description, he says, who can endure it? That it's going to be such devastation. Who can endure it? But then he says, yet even now, even with this promise of destruction, even with this understanding that God will judge his people, even now, he says, return to me. Return with all your heart. He says, return to the Lord your God. How do you return? He says, with fasting, weeping, and mourning. So that as you understand the condition you're in, and you're in that condition because of sin, that fast, weep, mourn, cry out to God. But it says something else. He says, rend your hearts and not your garments. Remember last week when we talked about Hosea, it talked about crying to the Lord on your bed, but not crying out to the God of heaven. Here he's saying, rend your hearts and not your garments. What does that mean? In the Jewish culture, they were very emotional, demonstrative. Even now at funerals, it's often that they will tear the lapels of their shirts or their jackets to show their grief. But sometimes grief can become ritualistic, that we know we should be acting a certain way and saying certain things, and maybe we feel bad. And that kind of grief does us no good if it's not a grief of the heart. And so he says, make sure that you are rending your hearts and not just your garments. And so that's something to think about. When you are sorry for something, are you sorry from your heart? Or are you sorry you got caught? Are you sorry it might have happened, but it really has no heart effect? Your mourning then is of no use. And he says return because God is gracious and merciful. He's slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. Psalm, I think it's 86, and Exodus 34. These words are used in different parts of the Bible. And so whether they were quoting, Exodus obviously wasn't, but if Joel was quoting them, or the psalmist quoting Joel, no matter how it is, there's a theme of God's steadfast love. That even if you're far from God, that he is loving and he is slow to anger. It says he relents over disaster. Who knows? And so the hope in Joel's day was turn to God with all your heart and repent. And because God is slow to anger and steadfast in his love, he may turn from judgment and show mercy and show grace. Enjoy reading Joel this weekend, or however many days you can, and see what you pull from the book of Joel yourself. Thank you. Have a great day.